All right, let's do this. Turn my mic up. All right, good evening, Crypt Keepers, and welcome to Cryptique. As you know, we discuss all things paranormal, occult, UFOs, metaphysical, hidden history, forbidden archaeology, all things truth, and about 150 other topics that we just don't have time to get into. And I'm joined, as always, by Ryan. How you doing today?
I'm good. I'm sequestered in an undisclosed location today. Not having my usual... I go like this, you might be able to see the background now. Okay. For some reason, this works better here than it does at home with the green screen.
Of course.
That's irritating.
Of course. It's so true, though.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're glad to have you on. We know you're out in the field doing some research, so we'll get through this. But all right, you want to run through what they need to know real quick?
Yeah. You guys already know. If you want to support the show, the best way to do it is to share it. With somebody who you think will like it, you can share it on social media. You can print out a QR code. You can do it however you like. Maybe for what do we have coming up next? Father's Day? Is that the next kind of big one? You can print out a QR code that links to our show and put it in a little box. Make your dad think it's like a nice watch or something like that, or maybe like in a cigar box, and then bam, it's even better. It's us.
Switcheroo.
Anyway.
Cryptique business card.
Yeah, but anyway, if you can also help by interacting with it on your podcast platform to help us fight the algorithms. You can check out what we're selling at cryptiquepodcast.com, and you can always get in touch with us at
cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com. You're also, you look like something we would do a show on right now because you're very blurry. Anyway. Yeah, and remember, guys, we like likes, but we love shares, and we love subscribing. That's what's going to help us. So please do that. And with that in mind, I want to send a big up to MGM Fancy, Ryan, and Jeff J. Thanks for following the show. And you know, something I noticed today is we have a lot of listeners in New Zealand, more so than Australia and some of the other, countries that I thought would be a little bit higher on the list. So thank you, New Zealand. You may be in the most beautiful place on earth. Thanks for listening. And we've got a short story coming up on how Maori sailors were the first to discover Antarctica. So keep listening, New Zealand. Ryan, is it okay with you if I do my topic first? Because I have just like a paragraph at the end that's going to kind of go along with the topic I think you're sharing.
Sure, go ahead.
Does that work for you?
Yeah.
I can't tell if your screen's frozen or you're incredibly still. Okay, you're kind of creeping me out here. I got to be honest with you. All right, so tonight I want to tell you guys about the Washington goo rain, also known as the Oakville Blobs. In the summer of '94, in Oakville, Washington, whose population just happened to be 666, approximately, woke up to a peculiar and unsettling phenomenon. So they're used to rainfall, obviously, all throughout Washington. It's a temperate rainforest. It rains all the time. They've seen every kind of rain you can imagine, right? But this time, instead of regular rain, and this town's on the coast too, or close to it. So they started getting gelatinous blobs descending from the sky, Ryan. Gelatinous blobs. It coated the landscape in this mysterious translucent substance. So this kind of sent shockwaves through the community, and it wasn't just because they were having this weird rain, right? There's more to get into, but it was like a really big deal in this town. So you need to know that like the townspeople came together and wanted to know what was going on. But we'll get to that. So the first encounter with these blobs occurred when police officer David Lacey was driving. So it looked like an ordinary rainy day, but Lacey, he tried to use his windshield wipers and they were not working. And we've all had something like that where a bug smashes on your windshield and the wipers just won't get it off and they just make it worse, like kind of spread it around on the windshield and stuff like that. So Lacey pulled over to a gas station and saw that his whole car was covered in this stuff. So at first, he's a police officer. He's probably going to look for some sort of scientific explanation. What is this? Whatever. Uh, but he and some of the other people that were exposed to this started having health issues. So at this point, it's about 3 a.m. and he was on patrol, and he had a civilian friend with him, which to me seems really odd. Keep in mind, this is 94, and, people did do and still do ride-alongs, but it sounds like it was more just, like, hey, you want to come out on my patrol with me? Nothing ever happens in this town. But David Lacey was quoted as saying, quote, obviously, we turned our windshield wipers on and it just started smearing to the point where we almost could not see. And we both looked at each other and said, geez, this isn't right. I mean, we're out in the middle of nowhere, basically. And where did this come from? End quote. So he pulled into a gas station to de-goo his windshield, and he put on some latex gloves. Smart, especially, back then. If you're dealing with something and you don't know what it is, don't touch it with your bare skin, Crypt Keepers, please. So he went on to say that the substance was very mushy. It's almost as if you had Jello in your hand and you could pretty much squish it through your fingers. We did have some bells go off in our heads that basically said that this isn't right. This isn't normal. And later that afternoon, Officer Lacey got sick. He said, I was to the point where I could hardly breathe. I started to put it together that possibly whatever the substance was, it made me violently sick like I had never been before, to the point where it just totally shut me down. End quote. Within days of his exposure, residents reported a range of symptoms from fatigue and nausea to vertigo and severe flu-like conditions. And the situation got worse as people and even some of the animals started to get really sick. So there's a local resident, Dottie Hearn, who kind of plays a big role in this. And she stepped outside that morning and the storm had ended, but the blobs were everywhere. And she says, quote, it looked like hail laying on top of the wood box and everywhere else. So I just went over and I touched it. And it wasn't hail. It was a gelatinous-like material. End quote. One resident, Beverly Roberts, recounted her experience after bringing some of the blobs home for examination. Shortly afterward, she fell ill too. And so that's two people so far. Three. So three people that we...
Yeah, and people who are willing to go touch this stuff. Whether
everybody that's come in contact with it has gotten sick.
Yeah, it reminds me, there was an episode of I might have mentioned it on this before, but Stargate Atlantis.
Mm-hmm.
There's an episode where, like, the one character, it's like Jason Momoa's first big role on TV, and he plays this, like, tracker guy that they meet on an alien planet, and they're tracking something, some kind of creature or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter, but he goes, like any other show where somebody's tracking something, and they find scat, and he sticks his fingers in it and, like, smells it. And the one scientist guy's like, really? You had to touch it to know that it was fresh? Like, you had to touch it.
Yeah. We see that a lot, man.
I promise you don't have to touch. Poke it with a stick.
Yeah, but that's a real thing. Every time, like, I'm watching Bigfoot videos all the time, and like, even on the Grizzly Man movie, they pick it up, they want to feel what's in it, and it's like, yeah, you can just, like, kind of smush it and see if there's whatever you're looking for, corn, human
bones,
body parts.
Yeah, like your cell phone that you lost.
Yeah, exactly. So Dottie Hearn also got sick, and she said, I started feeling dizzy. Everything started moving around and around, and it got worse. And as it did, I became increasingly nauseated. An hour later, Dottie's daughter and son found her sprawled on the bathroom floor. So Sunny Barclift is Dottie's daughter, and she says She was cold, drenched with perspiration. She was sweating like a motherfucker. And she said, my mom had been vomiting. She had extreme vertigo. She complained that she had difficulty with her vision and her vision was blurry. And so she went to the hospital, which is what you should do. And the diagnosis was a severe inner ear infection. So maybe she had, some vertigo from that. That would obviously make sense because your inner ear kind of guides your balance. And sometimes people that lose their hearing, say that they have trouble with balance. So it's interesting. But her daughter had a different idea. She said, for some reason, as we were going out the door, I remembered the substance and I wondered if perhaps it might have some sort of an effect on her. It might have made her sick. So I opted at that moment to take a sample of this gelatinous material to the hospital. And I would hope they would do this today, anywhere, but they're like, yeah, let's test it. I feel like a lot of places, doctors and stuff would be like, well, no, we're going to find the true cause of this. You can't possibly know because you're not a doctor. But anyway, they tested it and a lab tech found a clue, a substance that contained human white blood cells. But exactly what was it and why it fell from the sky could not be determined. So the goo was immediately sent to the Washington State Department of Health. Good deal. It was examined by microbiologist Mike McDowell, and he said it was very uniform. There was no structure that we could see visibly or with a microscope. I set it up on various microbiological media and attempted to isolate bacteria. So he discovered that the sample was full of 2 species of bacteria, one of which makes its home in the human digestive system. Gotta love your probiotics, Ryan. We're going back to Sunny now. This is Dottie's daughter, and she wondered if it was human waste dropped from an airliner.
Yeah, I was thinking with blood cells in it, maybe like just a plane was carrying blood for humanitarian effort and dropped some of it somehow.
Yeah, that would be so weird though. Like, hey, we had 4,600 pints of blood, and they're like, well, now we have 10. But so that's a good thought, right? That would make sense. But I think for an entire town to get caked, you would have to have a lot of planes flying overhead, and they're like, you know what, Oakville, you suck. We're dropping our feces on you.
We're dropping our blood waste on you.
Yes. So the FAA ruled that out because under the regulations, human waste is dyed blue. The substance was not blue. It was crystal clear. So basically, when they, I don't know how else to say it, when they drop waste or eject waste, it is it's dyed. It's got a dye added to it. So in a case like this, you can say, okay, boom, this is what it was. But that's not the case. So the blobs rained down on Oakville 6 times over a 3-week period, and dozens of people got sick. Several dogs and cats died after coming into contact with it, which is interesting too, because people, you can go either way, right? Some dogs eat poop. Some dogs won't touch something if they sniff that there's maybe something wrong with it. And cats are even more finicky, right? You could like cook salmon and put it out for your cat, and it might be like, not today. I'm not in the mood for salmon. You need to make me, something else. So it's interesting that these animals didn't sense that there was something wrong with it. Does that make sense? Do you kind of agree with that, or am I crazy?
No, it does make sense.
Okay. So Tim Davis is a microbiologist with Amtest Laboratories, and he had this to say. I saw what I think was a eukaryotic cell, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, probably not, which is basically a cell that has a definable nucleus and is found present in most animals. Translation: the goo was alive. But where did it come from? Dr. David Little A local physician was among the first to investigate, and at first he dismissed the connection between the blobs and the illnesses. Of course, it's just random that everybody was getting sick. But as more patients exhibited similar symptoms, he decided to dive a little bit deeper. And laboratory analysis revealed that the blobs contained two types of bacteria, Pseudomonas fluorescens and Entobacter cloacae, or cloacae. I'm sure all you guys know what that means because you're smarter than me, but I really don't know. But anyway, so while Pseudomonas fluorescens was considered harmless, Enterobacter cloacae raised concerns, especially in individuals with compromised immune systems. And we see that all the time. If you have a compromised immune system, obviously you're going to be way more susceptible to any kind of illness. The discovery of this bacteria only deepened the mystery, Ryan. Theories abounded, ranging from natural explanations to conspiracy theories involving covert government experiments. Some residents speculated that the blobs might be remnants of jellyfish or the result of military activity, suggesting the possibility of biological warfare testing. Dr. Little proposed a theory involving waste discharge from airplanes, as we said, but that was, quickly debunked and ruled out. So one of the theories suggested the blobs may be a form of starred jelly, a term used to describe similar substances found in various parts of the world. It reminds me of what Karen Wilkinson talked about, talking about angel hair, which is kind of a phenomenon similar to that, only it's almost like webs and not in blobs. But who knows? The temperature could determine that. It could be something else, obviously. But the Oakville Blobs, Ryan, were unique. They'd never been observed falling from the sky in the form of rain, and they had never been associated with illnesses or animal deaths before. So remember, this is blobs raining down. This is not regular rain that is like congealing, like interacting with something, that it falls onto or whatever. This is falling in this form. In any case, Sunny Barcliff said that, so this is hearsay, but she says that someone theorized that since the Navy had been conducting live bombing runs at sea, they might have blown up a school of jellyfish. And of course, this jellyfish would have been thrown up into the air and floated 50 miles inland, and over a period of 3 weeks fell 6 times. And that sounds silly, right? You blow up jellyfish and they're in the sky for 3 days or 3 weeks and they don't all fall at the same time.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That does sound pretty goofy.
Yeah. And I understand that you have to, investigate every possible theory because this is so weird. And put that out there, but it sounds silly to me. And the Air Force confirmed that practice bombing runs were being conducted over the Pacific, but they denied any knowledge of the unknown substance or any involvement in creating or dispersing it. But some locals were not reassured. Sunny Barcliff went on to say, "We had a significant number of military aircraft flying over the home prior to this happening. Her mother, Dottie, said every day almost, we had slow-flying bombers, helicopters, all black in color, and we kind of thought maybe it might have come from them."
Yeah. Are they thinking it's almost like a weapons test or an accidental byproduct?
I think that at this point they're thinking that it was an experiment, a test maybe. And it would make sense, maybe if you could put this down with something that's not going to just kill thousands of people, you're testing to see, okay, well, we can put a virus in this, or we can put bacteria in this and drop it and just see how it spreads.
Yeah.
And then when we're ready to drop it somewhere else, we'll put whatever in it, HIV, COVID, whatever in it, and drop it.
That's exactly exactly what I was just thinking. Like, you could put something not harmless, but something much more common, like a flu or something like that, see how it interacts with the population, how that spreads, and all you have to do is track how many flus are reported to see what it is, and then you just, I mean, if it's like a delivery system, then your real payload is whatever other much more horrific thing. Like, man, you hit it perfectly. You're muted.
They probably prefer me muted, but in any case, yeah, I mean, if you know you have 666 people, and I'm just throwing that out there, it's just for fun. It was around 666, and then 400 of them get sick. Then you know that 60% of the population is going to get sick with this stuff, or is going to interact with it enough to get sick with it.
Right.
So, yeah. So then a man, Maurice Gobiel, went on to say that they let off things in the air all the time here. There's testing done all over the place. There are a lot of places you can't go into. It's getting interesting. Going back to Miss Beverly Roberts, she says, maybe we were a biological experiment of some kind, a small one, maybe just to get people a little bit sick to find out, say, if an enemy did come over here with a biological bomb or something and dropped it, maybe it was just a test run to see how that would happen. So she's almost saying it in the opposite way. You know what I mean? Like, she's saying, well, maybe they weren't doing it as to test an offensive weapon, but to test what would need to be done if one was dropped, in the States.
Not testing the weapon on us, testing us on a potential enemy weapon.
Right.
So, sort of.
Yeah.
It feels like linguistic gymnastics, but I think I get my point across.
Yeah, and I think that would make sense too. Either way, it's not okay. It's not okay. So, the true nature and origin of the Oakville Blobs remains elusive. The lack of conclusive evidence, coupled with the disappearance of some samples during testing, has shrouded the incident in an air of enduring mystery. Wow. The events of that summer in '94 continue to puzzle scientists, historians, and the curious minds who seek to unravel the secrets behind this inexplicable phenomenon, like you and I, Crypt Keepers. And we'll throw Ryan in there too. So this is an interesting case. You have a lot of people that got sick. You have some animals that died, unfortunately. Where do you stand? What do you think this could, if you had to put money on it, what would you say this was? So we have an offensive weapons test, a defensive weapons test, jellyfish being dropped. I don't know that they would make people sick, or just a random paranormal phenomenon.
I don't know. I mean, the one thing that I mentioned briefly that we didn't really talk about was, what if it's a byproduct of something they're testing at that military base? What if it's something that I mean, people are suspicious of like the trails that jets leave, vapor trails, thinking that there could be something mixed in that. I mean, what if there is some kind of new fuel that they're testing, or some different kind of engine type that not only caused vapor to form, but accidentally caused this like gel to form as it mixes with something in the atmosphere or whatever. You'd think it's something that they would think of, but I'm just thinking there could be factors in military testing that accidentally caused this to happen, that maybe they didn't, for the most part, formed. Maybe it's some kind of blanketing by mistake that caused these blobs to form after the fact on the ground, for the most part. I mean, that doesn't explain how one hit that windshield, but
yeah,
it could be something unintentional. I almost feel like it's more likely to be that, because the whole idea of the news reporting these blobs appearing and suddenly making everybody sick in a particular town is not something the military would want to do if they were purposely trying to test something.
But they have in the past.
But yeah, I was going to say, but at the same time, the idea that they're like, well, let's see if people get the flu from this, as either like, how does this delivery system work, or how would we handle an outbreak? Either of those seems really plausible.
Yeah, going back to them testing, though, I mean, they sprayed in St. Louis in the 70s. We know that. That's admitted. So now we're talking, let's say this, I don't know what year specifically this happened in St. Louis, but I know it was the 70s. And even if it was 1970, this is only 24 years later. Now, if it's 1979, this is 15 years later. So I don't know. I mean, we like to think that they don't do that kind of stuff, but we know they do. Maybe this was an early move by the pharmaceutical companies. How can we put stuff out to make people sick and make them buy our products? Just saying. If I had to put my money on it, I would say I have no money. But if I was given some money to put on it, I would say that I think it's some sort of military experiment one way or the other. Not saying that it was an offensive test or a defensive test, but I just think the fact that these people are saying, well, no, they're, the government's like, no, of course not. Nothing to do with that. Not possible. And then the residents who live there, similar to when we talk about indigenous people, right? Oh, well, the people that live in the forest 24/7 say they see this creature, and some scientist goes in there for 3 days and is like, nope, doesn't exist. We are taking the military's word over it, who we know has lied repeatedly and sometimes has to lie. I mean, I'm not taking that part lightly. They can't reveal every secret they have, because then the other our enemies would find out about it and start working on it. And I just think we have to take their word for it. You guys, you live there. You've never seen this before. You got sick. You say there's military aircraft flying all around. Got to believe it's military. That's where I'm standing, Ryan.
Yeah, and as far as the jellyfish theory, the jellyfish are getting like blown up and down. And out of all the things that didn't happen, that one happened the least.
Right. Well, we should say that there's been times where like a cyclone has like sucked up a pond, and 3 minutes later, people are getting fish and frogs rained on them for 3 minutes, and then it's over.
Yeah.
So there is kind of a backstory that says, yes, this is possible, but it's not like, a tornado rolled through town and then for 3 weeks we were getting fish rain. So I think that kind of knocks that theory out of the park. So, all right, that's all we've got on the Oakville Blobs. We'll be right back after a quick break with Ryan's topic. Be right back.
Breastfeeding is natural, but it isn't always easy. That's where the Lactation Network comes in. They connect families to insurance-covered lactation care provided by credentialed lactation consultants, known as IBCLCs. TLN's expert lactation consultants can help you prepare for your baby's arrival, resolve breastfeeding issues, create a plan to wean, or anything in between. The Lactation Network provides in-home, in-office, and telehealth consultations. Get the breastfeeding care you deserve with the Lactation Network. Visit tln.care to learn more.
Welcome back, Crypt Keepers. Ryan, what you got for us?
So, I've told you before how sometimes I like to watch like Ancient Aliens and shows like that.
Sure.
And everything that they do is kind of posed as like conjecture. Like, could it be this? Could it be that? Could Could aliens have done this thing?
They're never saying this happened.
They're never saying it happened. Yeah. And there's a South Park episode where they're interviewing the kids. And they'll like clip out 1 second where it sounds like they're confirming, like, yes, aliens built whatever the school is or something. They're like, that's not what we said. I don't know. Sometimes they're funny, but
it's a way to get out of line, though, too, right?
Yeah, it's a way of like, we never claimed that happened, so don't sue us if you're actually the one who built that. Or like there's a guy suing Netflix on behalf of Egypt as a country for the Cleopatra documentary. Like that's a way of the History Channel not getting sued because they're saying like Egyptians could never have built something like this. It had to be
Right.
aliens. You know what I mean?
Well, that shit wouldn't fly
I
at
mean,
an
here for the baby
interrogation.
cruise.
I love the baby coos. I think that's we should add that for every show. But
You should just be somewhere in the room.
but that stuff wouldn't fly at an interrogation, right? Like the police aren't going to be, they're not going to be like, Ryan, where were you on the night of so and so at 8 p.m. And you're going to be like, where's anybody
Right?
at 8 p.m. on that night? I mean, really, where are we? You know, let's ask this question. Are we living in a normal the cop's going to be like, shut the F up and tell me where your body was at, you know, this time. So it is funny how, they never say that this is true.
Yeah, and their favorite topic seems to be Nazis for the most part. And I was kind of looking into this, and it looks like around like the 90s into the 2000s, there was kind of an explosion of like, look at the crazy shit the Nazis were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find really interesting about it, I listened to a few other podcasts about this topic, and they're like, it makes sense that around the 90s this would have gotten out there because that's when the Soviet Union fell. And all those classified documents would have leaked out, whether it was they were being sold, they were just being taken out by people, whatever. But a lot of information came out. And we also just sort of dismantled the Nazi government in general. Like we found out basically everything that they were up to. And the whole point that whichever one of these shows it was, I can't remember. I listened to a few. I listened to a couple of them on like double normal speed. Just to be like, am I missing any details? But they were saying if the U.S. government was just dismantled, picked apart in front of the whole world, like it would look crazy, some of the stuff that we were doing. And you would make all these same speculations too.
True.
But what I specifically wanted to talk about was the Black Forest UFO crash from 1936, which is also sometimes referred to as the Freiburg Disc. And I had heard this mentioned, and when I did research, there's very little out there about it. But apparently this UFO, something flying saucer, crashed near Freiburg in this forest, and basically the SS came and said like, hey, there's this thing, we're going to go ahead and just grab it and see what's going on with it. And they took it to Wellsburg Castle, I believe. And this is where it gets really History Channel. They talk about the Vril Society, which was really like kind of doing all this paranormal type research. Like if you played some of the old Wolfenstein games, there was like some paranormal and occult stuff going on with those where they're, you know, it's a fantastic.
They're kind of like us, only they want to eliminate most of the people in the world. They look into the
like harness paranormal stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, allegedly they found this flying disc and they took it over. Now there's like almost nothing about it. Which I found really interesting after seeing this on the History Channel, that they're talking about this disc, they're talking about reverse engineering, and there's like zero information to support it. And the Germans were almost pathological in their need to write things down and document things, whether they did that straightforward or not.
Right.
Like they might not want to say like we're sending slaves or prisoners to do this. They might say like we're sending bundles of cable or whatever, but there's like, you know, there are instances that I've read about where they were like code, like, oh, they really meant something else. But they still
like if you're making a drug deal, you don't want to be like, come over to my house here and buy 1,000 kilos of cocaine. You know, you're going to be like, hey, it's snowing over here. You want to swing by and ski? So
I accidentally have an extra Big Mac. Would you like a Big Mac?
There you go.
So, I mean, it is really interesting to look at the history of World War II and see that, like, when it started, the Royal Air Force and, you know, France and these other countries were basically using biplanes. They were using stuff that would have been suitable for World War I.
Yeah.
And in a very short period of time, they had the V1 rocket system, which the baby's excited about it. I don't know that those were like exactly guided. It sounds like the way they worked was they had a certain amount of fuel, and when they cut out, they just fell. Like they would just fly until they couldn't fly anymore, and then they'd fall. And I saw interviews where people were talking about like you knew you were okay if you could hear the engines. It's when the engines cut out. Like if it sounded like it was close and the engine cut out, like that was trouble. Yeah. And that's when you would need to run. And then the V2 rocket system, that's the one that most of us think of that looks like a modern ballistic missile that apparently had some kind of crude computer system with it too. I didn't realize that the Nazis had actually developed, not exactly modern computers, but we had stuff like ENIAC and things like that back in the day. Mm-hmm. But they had.
We should say, just for the listeners, that you are not ignoring your baby, that your wife is in the room, so they don't think like Ryan's busy talking about Nazis and his baby's hungry in the background.
Yeah, she's over there swinging around her toys and playing. I don't know why she's so vocal today. But there were also, there are things like the Nazi bell and stuff like that they were experimenting with, allegedly. Most people, like when you get into the Nazi bell, you're getting into Antarctic bases or the center of the... But yeah, they were experimenting with flying saucer type crap, but so were we. Like there was the Avro car that we've talked about before. The only really interesting thing that I saw from the History Channel was that in 1939, apparently they were experimenting with these flying saucers, and there's a 60 millimeter film that has come to light in some way, and they had a film expert analyzing it. But it's like, it looks kind of like the Evercar, but it's like hopping up high, like 30, 40 feet high, like in a city. There are buildings and streetlights and stuff like that that you can use to kind of gauge what it's doing and how it's moving. Mm-hmm. But it had similar claims that it was supposed to be able to move at around 1,200 miles an hour. It, was supposed to have incredible capabilities, and there were supposedly 3 versions of it created. The problem with it seems to be that the project for it started in 1935, so potentially before this crash. Mm-hmm. And one of the podcasts I was listening to, which was, I think, a couple English guys, they were suggesting that perhaps the Freeburg disc was one of these from a test. Like, it wasn't an alien thing. It was just one of their own devices that crashed, and they rushed to get it real quick before anybody else figured out what they were up to.
Well, so the 1,400 miles per hour is about twice the speed of sound.
Right.
So you're getting sonic booms with these rockets.
Right. Well, these were the flying saucer craft that were supposed to be able to do that. It was Project Hanabu, I think, however you pronounce it, something like that. But that was their project to create these flying saucers. And again, it's kind of similar to the Avro car thing. Mm-hmm. Although, if the film was real, they worked a lot better. Mm-hmm. But the Avro car thing might have worked a lot better if the original design had been used instead of just compromising and saying, like, well, let's make it like half the size and nothing like what the original designer wanted. We'll use off-the-shelf parts.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, they built a Temu flying saucer. If you haven't listened to the Avro car show, you can go back and listen to that one, and we tell you all about the Avro car. It's interesting, but it's not a flying saucer. It's a floating saucer.
Not exactly. Yeah, it's it's a hovering saucer. Yeah. So, yeah, it's then we should probably talk about the Vril Society at some point. Maybe I'll do some research on that.
Oh yeah.
One of them referred to like looking for the there was apparently some initiative to find the dark sun. Mm-hmm. Like they were referring to this new energy source as a dark sun, and they believe now that might refer to antimatter, which most sci-fi uses as some kind of power source. The combination of matter and antimatter being like harnessed kind of the same way nuclear is.
Right.
So if that's true, that they kind of understood what that was and just didn't have a better way to put it back then, that's really interesting. But this is one of those things that I think is mostly BS. Mm-hmm. Because there's there's no documentation on it. There's nothing. It's not like Roswell where there's photos of it or anything like that, where you have all this testimony that I was there and this happened and whatever. Like, there is so little information. The idea is basically the Nazis became so advanced so quickly, it had to have been this.
Mm-hmm.
But what I find hard to believe is that the Germans who had been flying biplanes and like were kind of just figuring out the combustion engine would really be able to do anything meaningful within such a short period of time with a crashed UFO, even if they really had one. You know, like if I was back in time and I dropped this laptop in Nazi Germany, I don't know that they'd really be able to do anything with that.
Right.
Like
they couldn't even figure out the password.
The circuitry, they wouldn't know how the fingerprint reader works. Like none of that would make sense. It's still a really interesting story because I think how much it's been expanded on. So one of the theories that I was seeing was that possibly the Roswell crash in 47 was one of these German craft, not alien, that the Germans had developed like 3 prototypes and some of them were working, and whether it was them or it was us or it was the Soviets that had experimented with them and were trying to fly them around like that, you know, a human crashing an experimental UFO reverse engineered from Nazi technology might be more plausible than aliens who are skillful enough to build these craft and get all the way here. We're just smash into the planet.
Yeah, but we see plane crashes. I mean, we saw the Challenger blow up. So,
yeah,
you know,
that's
anything
true.
can happen.
Yep, anything can happen. But yeah, it's
if you believe that story.
It's a really interesting idea, and what it reminded me of was this thing that Neil deGrasse Tyson said on Joe Rogan's podcast. Yeah, you roll your. I'm a little.
He's a caricature of a person.
We're a little saturated. We're a little saturated in Neil deGrasse Tyson content, but he was talking in one of these interviews about like the more interesting story buried within the Transformers movies was the idea that they briefly touched on that Transformers were found on Earth like 40, 50 years ago, or maybe it was like during World War II era. I don't know if it was supposed to be after that, around that time, whatever it was, but like we slowly were learning about technology from studying them. Because there's, in one of the movies, there's like a couple of them being held in the Hoover Dam. Like the Hoover Dam is shielding their radio signals or whatever the contrived explanation was. But he's like, that's a much more interesting story. Like finding this thing and then slowly over the course of like 50 to 70 years, figuring out all this technology and making these huge technological leaps. And I think that's really interesting. But I feel like a lot of the German advancements came from really smart people with unlimited funding, like no bureaucratic red tape to go through, and no morals. Yeah, because one of the things that they were talking about actually on the History Channel was if they were doing something dangerous that involved radiation or anything like that, they would just use basically people from concentration camps.
Yeah. It would make more sense to me, though, if, I mean, I understand that you want to test flight abilities, right? You want to say, okay, we made this flying saucer, for lack of a better term. Can it go to America on 1 tank of fuel or energon or whatever it's running off of?
Right. One McNugget of energon.
But I would think, though, too, like, well, wouldn't you see those on the front lines? I mean, I feel like one thing that they were very skilled at is like, we find something that works, we make a factory, they make tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of whatever, very good at like making an assembly line, basically. And I feel like if they had cracked this code, we would have seen these things out on the front line before testing, you know, if it could make it to New Mexico or whatever. So, I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, if you have overwhelming force, right? You have raptors and you have drones and you have that sort of stuff. It's not always just going to start out like, hey, we sent a drone to Afghanistan. It's going to be, hey, well, I guess America's a bad example because we haven't technically been invaded. But if your country's being invaded or you're invading another country, you're going to have that power right on the front line. You're not going to be like, let's see if it can. And I know we're talking about later in time, but we're not going to be like, well, let's see if it can fly to New Mexico first. You're going to be putting these things out to scare everybody because people will see something like that and be like, we have no chance. We may as well just surrender and hope they don't kill us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There'd be no way you wouldn't have seen them or heard about them. There were Allied pilots who reported seeing basically things that looked like ball lightning while they were flying over Europe. And they said that they, would kind of appear. They'd move in these erratic ways really quickly. They would mess with electrical systems and communications and things like that. And some people are claiming that the material that the hulls of these experimental saucers were made of, like, involved magnesium or something, and that they caused them to do this, to appear as like flashes of light. That doesn't make any sense, though. It's like, we have this super advanced weapon. What do you do with it? We basically buzz around Allied planes and mess up their walkie-talkies. Like,
I could see it if it was some sort of like drone type thing that eliminated the ability to communicate. You know what I mean? Like if there was a way that you could, do an EMP attack or something like that. And then all of a sudden, everybody on the front lines has to start using flags to communicate again. It's going to be a big advantage.
Yeah, so this is just one of those really fun stories. Not even really a story, it's a theory. Yeah. There's almost nothing behind it. Probably the most detailed article I found on it was somebody claiming that they had like remote viewed it through time, that they had used like some crystals or something like that and remote viewed the crash in 1936 and that they saw the Nazis come take it away. I mean, I guess that hypothetically could be true. I mean, anything can be true, but it's pretty hard to verify. And when that's your only source, other than the History Channel saying, like, could it be possible that the Nazis reverse engineered their technology from crashed alien craft?
Yeah, I mean,
not very compelling.
Well, I think that there is a fascination with the Nazis. And I don't think that it's because part of it is that militarily, what they did was amazing. It was horrific and awful, and they pulled no punches, right? So if you're not pulling it's like if you get in a fight with somebody, are you going to be like, I'm not going to do my best fighting moves. I'm going to do, I'm going to try a flying kick instead. No. You're going to be like, if I try a flying kick, I'm probably going to fall and get punched. But if I punch this guy, I can knock him out. And I don't see the Nazis being like, I mean, this is awful. We have direct energy weapons on these UFOs that we can just zap an entire city. And they're like, but no, it just seems wrong. So I think that they would have been all about having these things out, killing as many people as they possibly could if it were real. If it were possible.
I think the most likely explanation is that they really did start experimenting with this in 1935. They crashed one of their experimental craft. That was what they collected. And it just spawned all of these other theories and ideas, whether there's any real basis for them or not. And that, it just comes down to they were experimenting with anything and everything. We did it too.
Yep.
And we found it didn't work. They probably also found that it didn't work. They might have had 3 different versions because they tried 3 different attempts or propulsion systems.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it didn't work. There's no documented cases of dogfights with flying saucers during World War II. Although that would be pretty cool.
There is one during World War I. Remember, they said the Red Baron shot down a UFO. First person to ever do it. Now, here's the thing that, and whatever you believe on that or not is fine. But here's the thing. This story goes the way it probably would have gone if it were real, right? If it was a crashed UFO, well, definitely the Nazis are going to go get it. And if they could reverse engineer it, which is I mean, let's be realistic. If a raptor crashed in my backyard, that's all known technology, right? We assume it is. We don't know. There could be stuff in there we have no idea about that the military hasn't let out. But for the most part, it's all stuff we know about. I couldn't reverse engineer a raptor.
Right.
And that's current technology. And I know they had a lot smarter people than me working on it, but still, it's like, okay, you're about to build a rocket. Good for you. Now, let's see if you can figure out how to harness dark energy or dark matter or antimatter or whatever. It just doesn't seem like it would be possible. But I also see the Nazis being like, dude, we just got a flying saucer. We just got a flying saucer. We're going to have our own flying saucers with, lasers on them in 2 years. There's going to be hundreds of thousands of them flying everywhere. So you can surrender now, or we can kill you in 2 years. You know what I mean? Like, that's what they would have done.
Yeah, we didn't keep the bomb a secret. We used it twice.
Right. Yeah.
To demonstrate, and that was it.
I think it's plausible, but I just think there's just not enough information.
Yeah, I think it's all BS. But it is really cool the way it weaves in and out of stories that, hey, this was what inspired the Nazis. This is what people were seeing during like the 50s and 60s. This is what really crashed in Roswell, and why the government was trying so hard to cover it up, because it's not an alien craft. It's one of ours that we were using, probably Nazi scientists that we'd gotten after the war to help us, figure out from their own designs to see if we could further those and make them more useful. I like that a lot better than that it was actually a crashed alien craft. But it was also just really interesting, that one perspective of, we saw everything that this like incredible war machine was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we got to see every bizarre experiment and stuff like. I mean, there are whole episodes of like military TV shows and stuff that would be on History Channel talking about the Navy experimenting with building ships out of ice using pipecrete. It was a mixture of water and like sawdust that created this like really hard ice because there was like a fiber bond in it, and creating this ship because they thought they could just like basically heal it when there was damage by sort of pumping ice back into the spot that was damaged.
Wow.
Cool idea. They did experiment with it. They made one of them, but they didn't do it again. They didn't keep doing it. But it's like, imagine how many other things there are that we don't know about that they covered up. They couldn't cover up a giant experimental ice ship in the middle of like a bay or a lake or wherever it was they tried to mess with it.
And they're going to cover up all their failures, right?
As much as
they don't want to be known as like, oh, they tried this stupid idea and they tried this stupid idea. They got this one right and they tried this stupid idea. Their goal is to make everyone think that they're superior and infallible, basically.
Well, and there's probably value to your enemies maybe knowing that you're experimenting with this stuff, but not knowing whether you're able to do it or not.
Right.
Like, oh, the Americans were experimenting with this. Were they able to do it? Maybe. So I guess we need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. And, that goes to push your enemies too, though.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, maybe if they were to say like, oh, we're just, we come around in our lederhosen and we eat bratwurst and have beer and have fun. And we like to go to the Alps and stuff like that. They're not going to be like, all right, we got to get ready for these people, man. They're about to bring it. You know what I mean? They're going to be like, yeah, they're no threat. And then all of a sudden there's tanks and subs everywhere and stuff like that. So yeah, it can work either way, I guess. Sun Tzu said, appear strong when you are weak and weak when you are strong. So, all right. So
Rose doesn't care. Now that I've said it's fake, she's asleep.
Right.
I just look back.
All right.
Like that.
All right. So I pulled this one out of the news recently. This has been as of 5/26/24, this is just a few days old. So, and I wanted to save this to the end because it kind of goes along with what you're saying a little bit, at least better than what I was talking about. So, in Chile, which is fun to say, a senator's been abducted or was abducted. So that's scary, right? Like, if you're in the government and you start having senators disappear, judges disappear, you better get your stuff together quick. But this one, it's a little different. The Chilean senator recently shared a remarkable tale of abduction by extraterrestrials and subsequent visitation by an individual claiming to be from beyond our world. According to local media reports, Kareem Bianchi recounted this astonishing experience during an interview with a Chilean media outlet. The incident, as the senator recalled, took place one evening in 2012 while he was driving to Punta Arenas. Bianchi was conversing with a friend on the phone when he was startled by the sight of a large circular light composed of various colors in the night sky. Then his car shut down, and within moments he found himself approximately 100 miles away from the location of the sighting. Reflecting on the event, Bianchi admitted feeling deeply shaken by the experience, particularly since he was alone at night and feared further occurrences. Despite making it to his destination without incident, his concerns were reignited a few days later when a mysterious stranger visited his office. Shockingly, the visitor claimed to be an alien, providing Bianchi with photocopies of a magazine related to extraterrestrial presence. This enigmatic bald man ominously hinted that he would one day reveal his story to the world. Although Bianchi described the materials as unremarkable, the magazine, he confessed to feeling uneasy about someone knowing of his encounter, as he had not shared it with anyone. Following these bizarre events, the senator experienced a curious series of synchronicities involving owls, often associated with UFOs and aliens, which persisted for about a month. Additionally, Bianchi noted that the suspected abduction left him imbued with a static energy that caused fatigue in those around him. Bianchi's extraordinary account has sparked widespread interest and debate in Chile, with some expressing awe at his experience while others have dismissed or questioned it. In response to the controversy, the senator expressed frustration, stating, "I didn't want to talk much about this, but grew tired of those who doubted me. It's been like you're crazy or smoked something or unfit," Bianchi lamented, "but it's what I lived." What do you think about that one?
That has all the hallmarks of an abduction.
And almost like a weird Men in Black.
Was he supposed to move instantaneously, or are we assuming there's lost time?
Lost time. So
yeah, and especially the owls thing.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of the time that gets left out, but owls are common for screen memories and things like that. So that makes it's more believable to me.
Yeah, and it's a senator. Now we all know that politicians are sleazy, conniving, used car salesmen, slime balls, with the obvious exclusion of Judge Jim Gray. But no, obviously there's some good people too. And
who told us he is not a politician and he has the votes to prove it.
That's right. So this guy doesn't want to lose face, I'm sure. I mean, he's a senator. He probably has a retirement. He probably, people that get into places of power, they tend to want to retain that power. They don't want to show any weakness. And I feel like he's showing weakness, like I am susceptible to this. Whether it happened or not, I don't know, because we only have his word to go by. We don't have the person that was on the phone with him. And then we only have his word to go by that someone came and visited him, kind of a bald Men in Black, if you will. So yeah, I'm not sure one way or I'm not sure if I believe it, but I don't really know what his motivation would be for sharing something like this, unless it's just like, when a murderer confesses, like, I've just got to get this off my chest. I can't keep it in anymore. So, but I don't think it was a Nazi UFO.
Yeah, and what he said, like, people are telling me this, but this is what I've lived. Like, that seems like somebody who can't take it anymore.
And I do know that, like you mentioned, that owls are common in alien themed stories. So he could have known that, or he could have been somebody that was so caught up in, politics and finances and stuff like that, that he has no idea. But then all of a sudden he's just seeing owls all the time. So
yeah,
I don't know. Kind of a cool story. Like I said, it happened in 2012, but he just came out and talked about it. So we'll see if there's a movie deal or a book deal or something. Then maybe we can look
Netflix special. Yeah.
We can look at motivation. So who knows? Maybe Zach Baggins will buy that extraterrestrial magazine off of him. Give him a couple $100,000 for it. A couple thousand pesos. I don't know if they use pesos in Chile, but anyway, I guess that about wraps it up because we're kind of grasping for stuff here. So you want to tell them what they need to know?
Yeah. As always, like, subscribe, share, comment, whatever you can do. It all helps out. If you want to help us keep the service on, you can make a donation at buymeacoffee.com/cryptiquepi. You can get in touch with us and tell us about your experiences, your homemade UFO that you crashed somewhere and caused a big UFO flap. Whatever it is you want to let us know about, you can do so at cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com. And you can see what Jay's been working on design-wise at cryptiquepodcaststore.com.
And remember, Crypt Keepers, if you see some kind of weird substance that you've never seen before, maybe don't pick it up. Maybe don't let your dog sniff it. Maybe don't try and sneak it into your cat's tender victuals for the night. So leave it alone. That's all we've got for you tonight. Good evening, Crypt Keepers. And we will actually, you know what? Before that, I want to, if there's anyone still listening, I want to tell you guys that we have Taylor Keene coming up real soon here. He's a Native American author that the book Rediscovering Turtle Island, which Turtle Island is the United States, comes out on June 11th. I have had the privilege of reading the book. It is amazing. He will be an amazing guest. I know he will. We're going to ask him all about the book. He knows all about Cahokia Mounds, all about it. So we're going to get into that. And hopefully he will, now highly, highly educated man. We're going to see if we can get him to play in the mud with us a little bit and talk about some Native American legends. So we're going to talk a little bit, hopefully, about giants. Now, the Cherokee people, of which he is a tribe, have a belief in Bigfoot that they call the booger. Love it. And then they also have, little people in their stories. So little wild men. So that should be a blast. And tune in for that, and we'll talk to you soon. Good evening, Crypt Keepers.
People say sharing is caring. I say it's overrated, especially when it comes to eating pizza. Thankfully, On the Run 7-inch pizza is sized just right, and just for me. I go with a pepperoni and a large fountain drink. A perfectly portioned personal meal. On the Run. It's my sharing your pizza is overrated store. 7-inch personal pizzas are available at participating locations.